Okay, in class, we didn't get to talking about example 4. We didn't do any problems from that. So we wanted to go through those couple of examples here, 25 and 26, which we didn't talk about. But first, let's look at what we're doing here and why we're doing it. So the idea here is we want to figure out a line, what line is being reflected over. So in order to figure out what line here is being reflected over, we have to know that our points are going to be equidistant away from that line of reflection. So if L is your the point we're looking at in the pre-image, it gets reflected over line T and it goes to L prime. The distance between the line of reflection and L is going to be the same as the distance from L prime to the line of reflection. So those are going to be the same distance away. So the midpoint of L and L prime is going to be on the line of reflection. The midpoint of K and K prime is on the line of reflection, and the midpoint of M and M prime is on the line of reflection. We only need 2 points to define a line. So if you can find 2 of those midpoints, you will be able to find the equation for that line. So if you can find 2 midpoints, you'll be able to use those points to find the slope, and then you can use that as well to find the y-intercept. So it's going to cut away now and then go to the other video. Sounds great. Okay, this is the question, the type of question that we didn't get to in class. It's related to example 4 from the lesson. And basically what it's asking us is to write what is the reflection rule that maps each triangle onto its image. I don't like how it's worded here. You're really not finding the rule. You're simply finding the line that it's being reflected over. So it's really not the same as finding a rule. You're just finding the line that's what they're asking. What line is being reflected over? Okay, so for 25 here, we have our pre-image, that's DEF, triangle DEF. And we're gonna reflect it over some line that we need to find. And it's gonna end up being D prime, E prime, and F prime. Okay, so how we're gonna do this is we gotta find the midpoint of our points here. So let's start with D and D prime. So we got to find the midpoint of D and D prime. So if we do the midpoint of D and D prime, okay, our midpoint formula was x1 plus x2 over 2 and y1 plus y2 over 2, right? We were finding the average of the 2 x values and the average of the 2 y values. So our 2 x values here are going to be 3 and 1. So 3 plus 1 divided by 2. And then for the y, 6 plus 6 divided by 2. Okay, so the midpoint of D and D prime here is going to be, that's going to be 4 divided by 2 is 2. And that's 12 divided by 2 is going to be 6. So the midpoint there is going to be 2, 6. Okay, and then we can do the same thing for E and E prime. So we're going to do the midpoint, okay, of E and E prime. So our 2 x values there are negative 4 and 8. So negative 4 plus 8 divided by 2. Okay, and our 2 y values there are negative 3 plus negative 3. Right, and divide by 2. Okay, so the midpoint of E and E prime, right, is going to be 4 divided by 2 is 2. And then negative 3 plus negative 3 is negative 6. Divided by 2 is going to be negative 3. Okay, so those are your 2 midpoints. Okay, once you have those 2 points, those 2 midpoints are going to be part of the line that we're reflecting over. Right, we could also find the midpoint of F if we wanted, and the midpoint of F and F prime is also going to be on that line. But to find the equation for a line, you only need 2 points. So we only needed 2 midpoints here. So if we find the midpoint of D and D prime and the midpoint of E and E prime, we'll be able to come up with the line. So a line, again, you can do y equals mx plus b is fine. You can do point slope form. right, would also work, but y equals mx plus b is probably generally how you guys do it the most. So that's what we'll do here. Okay, so slope, right, is rise over run. So we're going to do rise over run, right, also known as, right, change in y over change in x. Okay, which change in y is simply the difference of the two y values, so y1 minus y2. And change in x is simply the change in the x value, so x1 minus x2. Okay. So for our 2 points, we're going to take this, and it's confusing. This is a lowercase m for slope. The big M was midpoint. Lowercase m is going to be slope. Okay, so we have our points 2, 6, and 2, -3, and we did this for the parallel lines project, so we should be familiar if we had forgotten from algebra. So we have 2 minus 2, right, over, I'm sorry, definitely don't know what I'm doing here, right? Okay, so we have 6 minus -3 over 2 minus 2, okay, which is going to give us 9 over 0, okay, which means we have no slope. Okay, so if we have no slope, we know we have a vertical line, and we know the vertical line is going to be x equals something. So we would have x equals, and then what are we going to have x equal to? It's going to be 2. Okay, so when we found out we had no slope, we know we had vertical line, and so it would be x. Our line we're reflecting over is going to be the line x equals 2. And if we put this on the graph, we're able to see that. Okay, so if we put that on the graph here, we're able to see that. Here is triangle DEF, that's the pre-image, and then D prime, E prime, F prime is your image. So all these points are getting reflected across that line, right? D is 1 to the right, it's going 1 to the left. F is 4 to the right, it's going 4 to the left. E is 6 to the left, it's going 6 to the right. So they're all getting reflected across that line, x equals 2. Okay. And then if you want to do the next one, again, it would be the same thing. You got to find the midpoints here. Okay, so if we just want to go through it really quick, if you want to find the midpoint of G and G prime, that's going to be 9, right? And then halfway between -2 and 12, that's going to be 9, 5, right? So you'd have 9, 5 for this one of your midpoints. So one of your points on the line of reflection. Here you'd find the midpoint of -2, -15, and -2, 25. So that's going to be -2, and then halfway there, that's going to be 5. So -2, 5. Okay, and then you want to find this equation with these two. So those would be your two midpoints for G and G prime and H prime. And then you'd want to find the equation for that line, right? So you got, first thing you got to find is the slope. So we would do our change in y over change in x. So that's going to be 5 minus 5 over 9 minus -2, which is going to give us 0 over 11, which gives us a slope of 0. Right, so we know y equals, right, 0x plus b. Right, you can plug in one of your points. So let's plug in 9, 12. I'm sorry, these are the 2 points on our line, so we got to plug in one of these two. So let's plug in 9, 5. So we'll plug in 5 for y. And then we have 0 times 9 plus b. Okay, 0 times 9 is 0, so you're just going to get 5 equals b. So your equation here, since it's 0x, it's just 0. It's just going to be y equals, right, mx, so 0 times x is 0 plus 5. So it's just going to be y equals 5. okay, which is a horizontal line. Okay, but it doesn't have to be a vertical or horizontal line. It could be, the line y equals 2x. If you find out your slope was 2, you would then plug a point in, find the y-intercept, and you can reflect over that line as well. So it doesn't need to be horizontal or vertical. In these two cases, it happened to be horizontal and vertical. So a vertical line has a no slope. So this was x equals 2, and then our horizontal line has a slope of 0. So y equals 5. There will be a question like this on the test.